This guy had his leg amputated after an accident, and 2.5 years later, his leg reportedly grew back instantly on its own. Well, I'll tell you more because I can see you're making a funny face, and you're right. So here's what happened in 2 minutes. It's the end of July 1637 in Spain. A 20-year-old peasant named Miguel-Juan Pellicer is driving a kind of cart loaded with wheat to a farm. The cart is pulled by 2 mules. Miguel-Juan Pellicer, okay, let's call him Miguel because it's very long and I can already feel some of you losing interest. So our brave Miguel is on the back of one of the 2 mules when suddenly he falls. Under the stifling summer heat and with the fatigue from work, one could say he had a sort of fainting spell. When he is on the ground, one of the wheels of the heavy cart runs over his right leg below the knee and fractures his tibia in the middle. Our Miguel went through many hospitals and had his leg amputated in October 1637. 2 years later, on March 29, 1640, Miguel was at his parents' home in Calanda. Calanda, for those who don't know, is here. And today, it is a charming little town of about 4,000 inhabitants. Around 10 p.m., Miguel goes to bed. A little later, between 10:30 and 11 p.m., his mother enters the room. She smells a strange fragrance, approaches the bed where her son is sleeping, and is shocked to see that from the coat serving as her son's blanket, not 1, but 2 feet are sticking out. She goes to get her husband, then they wake up their son, and there it is. The miracle has happened. The leg that was amputated has reappeared. Here are the facts, roughly speaking, in short form. So let's say it right away. When faced with a story like this, it's normal if you think, what kind of crazy story is this? And if you had that reaction, it's a normal reaction. It shows that you are sane. Whether you are a believer or not, I'm sure you have already heard about miracles. These supernatural phenomena science will never be able to explain. The question is, do they really exist? Chosen to investigate for you 100 cases of miracles that believers claim to be inexplicable. We are going to see if this guy really had a leg that grew back, and we will look into 99 other cases. Honestly, it's perfectly normal to be extremely suspicious. And even if you are a believer, it's normal to have some doubts. And indeed, for each of the 100 cases that I will present to you, before shouting miracle, we will carefully check if there are no other possible natural explanations, much simpler. Imagine someone starts levitating in front of you, flying into the sky. If you immediately say, wow, it's a miracle, well, that's not right. You should first simply check if the guy didn't have a jetpack, for example. We need to check if he wasn't suspended from a crane. And we need to explore all possible natural hypotheses like that. And if we have truly exhausted all possibilities and still have no possible explanations, only then can we conclude that there exists a certain natural phenomenon, something that goes beyond the natural physical laws. For our brave Miguel, isn't there a simpler explanation than immediately shouting miracle? First of all, the first thing one might want to criticize about this story is that it's really quite old. At the time I'm making this video, in 2024, it has literally been 384 years since the miracle supposedly occurred. We really want to attribute this to the legends of the Middle Ages. In 1640, it wasn't the Middle Ages anymore. But you see what I mean? Except that we can't do that. We can't just say, yeah, it's too old, so it must be false. Because there are plenty of old things, even really, really old things, that are well documented and certain. We know that Julius Caesar existed, and we know a lot about his life in an extremely precise and detailed manner. It is known that he died on March 15, 44 BC at 11 a.m., assassinated by 23 senators. Yes, it's precise. And if we can be so precise, even though it dates back more than 2,000 years, well, it's simply because the historical method is serious and rigorous. Thanks to the work of historians, we can know past events with certainty. You can't just say, yeah, the miracle of Calanda, anyway, it's super old, so it's not at all verified. Well, that's not necessarily true. What matters is whether this case is well documented or not. It would be enough to have proof, on one hand, that Miguel-Juan Pellicer really existed, it's not a fabrication, and that he indeed had a leg amputated. And, on the other hand, it would be enough to have proof that after this amputation, our Miguel indeed regained both his legs. Remember, as these are the two things we need if we want to say that a miracle occurred. Evidence like this, with the historical method, can be obtained. Well, so, do we have anything? Regarding the miracle of Calanda, we have a lot of elements that make this story really well documented. We know he existed because there is a record of a guy in April 1640 who claimed that his amputated leg grew back. Well, yes, imagine if this story were true. The least we could expect is that this good Miguel-Juan Pellicer would have announced the miracle he benefited from everywhere, or if not him, that the relatives who had seen him before with an amputated leg and then after with both legs would have wanted to make this wonder known. It's not every day that something like this happens. We have records of several people who claim to have witnessed this miracle as early as April 1640, just a few days after the so-called miracle. For now, it may not mean that there was really a miracle, but what it does mean is that people did indeed claim there was one as early as 1640. The first thing agreed upon to start with is that this is not a story fabricated decades or even centuries later. As early as April 2nd, 1640, just 4 days after the miracle that supposedly occurred on March 29th, there is a notarial act that recounts all the events. It was written by a notary, Master Miguel Andreu. He was the royal notary of Mazaleon, a small town about 50 kilometers from Calanda. In this notarial act dated April 2nd, it is revealed that Miguel-Juan Pellicer is the legitimate son of Maria Blasco, and Miguel Pellicer, we have Miguel the father, Miguel the son, Miguel the notary. It seems that Miguel was really the trendy name in Spain at the time. The notary's deed reports the testimonies of Miguel-Juan Pellicer, his parents, as well as many other witnesses who will be mentioned again. All the witnesses are in agreement. Miguel-Juan Pellicer was seen with one leg and a stump on his other leg before March 29th, and then again with 2 legs afterward. The fact that Miguel had both his legs at the time of the notarized act on April 2nd seems evident, since the notary himself could see that he was perfectly healthy, even though, as we will discuss later, the notary might also have been an accomplice in a conspiracy that would span centuries. The real question is, what would prove that Miguel-Juan Pellicer had only one leg before that date? So, would it be testimonies? You're probably thinking, seriously? All of this is based on testimonies. If it's testimonies reporting the miracle, they are worthless. There are many people who claim to have seen aliens, the Yeti, or the Loch Ness Monster. It is wrong to say that testimonies are worthless. Almost all of our knowledge is based on testimonies. You know your date of birth because your parents told you. You know that E equals MC2 because scientists told you. You know that Julius Caesar was assassinated because historians have told you so, and they know it thanks to testimonies, once again. And you believe your parents, scientists, or historians because you consider them trustworthy. And so you consider their testimonies reliable. That's what matters, that the testimonies are reliable. And what will determine their reliability? It could be the number of consistent testimonies, but beyond that, it will be the origin of these testimonies. Are the people who testify trustworthy, predisposed to believe in medieval legends? Imagine you have a believer who tells you, I saw the Virgin Mary. Everything depends on her testimony. Sorry, that might be true, but it doesn't mean much unless she gives you solid reasons to believe what she's saying. It's like when that guy, Rael, claims he met extraterrestrials. It only relies on his own testimony, and indeed, in that case, one could say it is worthless. But now, imagine that you have 1,000 people telling you they saw the Virgin Mary in the street, and among these 1,000 people, many were not even believers, or were completely averse to such things, and they were there by chance and did not know each other beforehand. There, you will admit it starts to get interesting and that we could not dismiss these hundreds of testimonies without taking them into account. A large number of consistent testimonies from people with diverse interests and backgrounds and have no reason to lie or make things up becomes solid evidence. And during a trial, that can be more than enough to constitute what is called evidence. For Miguel-Juan Pellicer, the question is, these people who testify to having seen him before March 29th, 1640 with only one leg, then, after that date with his 2 legs, are they trustworthy? And are their testimonies reliable? Or are they friends and family of Miguel-Juan Pellicer who made up the story from scratch to create a buzz in their village and throughout the country? Let's look at who these witnesses are. To begin with, do you know what a parish is? It's a bit like the church of a town or village. And the parishes had registers where they recorded the dates of baptism, marriage, etc. of all their parishioners. Thus, the archives of the parish of Calanda provide us with valuable information about Miguel-Juan Pellicer and his family, as they were Catholics and therefore parishioners. It is written that little Miguel was baptized on March 25th, 1627. He was probably born on the same day. He was the second child in a family of 8 siblings. During his childhood, he was taught by the priest of his parish at the time, Don Juan Rulis. At that time, Spain, as well as most other European countries, was very Catholic. When you take the road to Valencia, there is a chapel in honor of the Virgin Mary under the invocation of the Virgen del Pilar. I never took Spanish, not even as a 4th language. In French, it is called the Virgin of the Pillar. In fact, according to an ancient tradition, Mary, the mother of Jesus, appeared on top of a pillar in the year 40 in Zaragoza, Spain, a city about 100 kilometers from Calanda. In the region, the Virgin of the Pillar was particularly venerated, especially in Calenda. Moreover, another tradition reports that she protected the town of Calanda in 864 against an Islamic invasion. If I am telling you all this, it is because it will be important later on. But for now, just remember that our little Miguel was very devout and loved to pray, especially to Mary, in this small chapel of the Virgen del Pilar. Well now, a little transition to enter the 17th century and closely follow the incredible story of our Miguel. No, we went back a bit too far there. Perfect. Here we are. Let's go. Around the age of 19 or 20, that is, towards the end of 1636 or the beginning of 1637, Michael, who is still single, leaves his parents' home on his own initiative to ease their burden because they are very poor. He goes to work as a farm laborer for his maternal uncle, Jim Blasco, whom we will call Uncle Jimmy from now on because it will be simpler, in the countryside around Castellón de la Plana, by the Balearic Sea, facing Ibiza. Then, one day at the end of July 1637, the famous accident with the cart Two Mules occurs. So, how do we know that this accident really happened, and that it is not an invention by him and his Uncle Jimmy? Well, because to receive care, his uncle first takes him to Castellone, and then immediately after to the hospital in Valencia, about 60 kilometers away. Now, at the Royal Hospital, the records documenting the admissions of sick patients are found, and a note indeed mentions his entry on the date of August 3rd, a Monday. The note is so precise that it even describes how the injured person is dressed. I quote, "He is wearing torn brown clothes, and it bears the signature of the employee who wrote it, a certain Pedro Toroselas." In this miracle of Calanda, we are far from hearsay and storytelling, all those things typical of oral tradition. No, here we are dealing with well-documented facts. Poor Michael stays only 5 days at the hospital in Valencia, during which I am still reading an excerpt from the records that have reached us. Various remedies were applied to him that had no effect. In his misfortune, he misses his homeland. He then wants to return to his region, Aragon, whose capital is Zaragoza. And then, he has probably heard about the famous hospital in Zaragoza, the Royal and General Hospital of Our Lady of Grace. That, I won't say twice. He leaves Valencia and heads to Zaragoza. He wants to seek protection from the Virgin of the Pillar, whom he loves. At the time, the journey was a real hassle. I don't need to spell it out for you. There were no planes, no cars, no serene travel. The main thing is that, injured as he was, he dragged himself, there's no other word for it, from stage to stage, over more than 300 km in the middle of a heat wave, during a journey of more than 50 days, sleeping here and there thanks to the network of refugees for pilgrims or hospitals spread throughout Spain. He finally arrives in Zaragoza at the beginning of October 1637. To move around, he relies on crutches and a kind of wooden leg attached to his knee, folded with straps. Upon arriving at the hospital in Zaragoza, he first goes through a ward reserved for patients with high fever, then is quickly transferred to the surgery department. There, the doctors describe his leg as very infected. In short, completely out of service. The consultation is chaired by Professor Juan de Estanga, head of the department, who teaches at the University of Zaragoza. Also present are surgeons Diego Milaruelo and Michael Beltran. How do we know all this? How do we know the names of the surgeons? Since after the famous miracle of March 29, 1640, there will be a trial that will last 1140. There will be a trial that lasts 11 months, during which numerous witnesses, including the doctors themselves, will be questioned, but we will come back to that. So the surgeons, seeing the pitiful state of our brave Michael Juan's leg, indeed decide to amputate it. There is nothing else to be done. It is therefore Estanga, the head of department, and Milaruelo, who performed the amputation in mid-October, cutting the right leg 4 fingers above the knee. During the trial, they will give all the details of the amputation, but I'm not sure you want to know how it was done back then because it wasn't very pretty. And then, at that time, there were no really effective means of anesthesia. After completing their work, they cauterized the wound, which means they closed it up, and that's what gives the word agnon. The surgeons were also assisted by a surgery student, who this time is not named Michael, but Juan Lorenzo Garcia. He is the one who takes care of retrieving the severed leg and placing it in the chapel of the hospital where the bodies of deceased patients are gathered. In his testimony during the trial, he will say that he showed the bloodied limb to several nurses, as well as to the priests of the hospital, including Pascual del Cacho, who was also summoned to the trial. Then, the apprentice surgeon Juan Garcia, along with a colleague, buries the leg in a part of the hospital cemetery reserved for this purpose. Let's move forward a bit. After a few months in the hospital, Michael is finally allowed to leave in the spring of 1638. The administration provides him with a wooden leg and a crutch. It is 2 years before March 29th, 1640, the date of the miracle, and these 2 years between his discharge from the hospital with only one leg and March 29th, 1640, will be the most difficult for Michael. Indeed, to survive, he is forced to beg. At that time, some beggars, like the crippled ones, had a permit to beg in front of a church. They were called the pordioseros. Michael easily obtains this status and regularly begs in front of the Chapel of Our Lady of Hope in Zaragoza. Zaragoza, at the time, has only 25,000 inhabitants. Thus, very quickly, many people come to know Michael as his missing leg, which he leaves visibly exposed according to the custom of beggars, and his young age move everyone. Imagine, a young man in his 20s with a leg amputated, begging at the door of a church. It doesn't go unnoticed. Every morning before going to beg, Michael attends Mass and prays in front of a small 40-centimeter statue of the Virgin Jubilee present in the church. Then he asks the altar server, who takes care of the 80 oil lamps burning in the chapel, for some oil to rub on his leg stump. Moreover, Professor Destanga, who regularly reviews the young man for his follow-up, will reproach him for this, as he explains that the moisture caused by the daily anointing with lamp oil can hinder complete healing. But for the young amputee, his faith in the Virgin of the Pillar outweighs his concern for sanitary rules, and he continues to regularly apply oil to the stump. After each day of begging, one of two things. Either Michael has collected enough money and he can then take shelter for the night at the Tablas Inn, run by a certain Juan de Mazas and his wife Catalina Xavier. Juan de Mazas, the innkeeper, will also be summoned to the trial to recognize the client he has welcomed with one leg and who he will then see during the trial standing on both feet. When Michael hasn't earned enough money during the day, he sleeps on a bench under the arcades surrounding the courtyard of the hospital, where he now feels at home. Everyone has taken a liking to him and helps him as much as possible. We move forward a little more. After living this life for 2 years, Michael decides to return to his parents' home in Calanda in the spring of 1640. He had not dared to return earlier, taken by shame, because, as he would later testify, he said to himself, "How can I return to my parents when I left against their will and in full health, and now I find myself with one leg less?" He makes up his mind and leaves Zaragoza, heading towards his hometown Calanda. The journey is 118 kilometers. We know all the details of his journey because many people he met along the way were able to testify later after the famous miracle. Well, yes, you have to imagine that when Michael got his 2 legs back, while he claimed to have only one before, as many people as possible who had met Michael when he had a stump were contacted to confirm that he indeed had only one leg. Logical, right? It's the least one could expect. During his journey, he first goes to Fuentes de Hebro, 27 kilometers away, on the cart of a traveler he met, a guy named Bernard, and in the company of 2 other young men who are also heading towards Calanda, Francisco Felez and Lamberto Pascual. The next day, as the traveler with the cart could go no further, he had to reach Quinto de Hebro, 16 kilometers away, on foot, suffering greatly. The pressure of the wooden leg on the stump is so painful that he has to move forward almost entirely relying on his crutches. The 2 other young men who were accompanying him cannot afford to go so slowly and continue the journey alone. The next day, he manages to reach Samper, where he stops at Domingo Martin's inn. Yet another, who will testify later. He encounters many other people whose names and testimonies we have, thanks to the help of pilgrims, with the aid of mulebacks and carts. A somewhat ironic journey when one remembers his accident. He finally reaches Calanda between March 4th and 11, after about a week of travel. It's been more than 3 years since Michael left home, and now he is almost 23 years old. His parents welcome him warmly, fortunately. Otherwise, the poor guy would have really hit rock bottom. But quite quickly, because Michael doesn't want to be a burden to his parents, he resumes begging. It is important to understand that at the time, begging was not a dishonor, but rather a duty in case of necessity. Many will testify to having seen the young amputee in the villages around Calanda, riding a little donkey with his severed leg in plain sight, as in Zaragoza, to elicit the kindness of the inhabitants. 2 or 3 weeks pass like this, and we arrive at that famous Thursday, March 29th, 29 months after the famous amputation and 9 days before Easter. That evening, Michael sleeps at his parents' house, but they are not alone, as his parents hosted a soldier from the Royal Cavalry for the night. Indeed, it was during the 30 Years' War, a war notably between France and Spain. 2 companies of soldiers were passing through and decided to stop in Calanda for the night. The soldiers were evenly distributed among the inhabitants by the town's notary, a 27-year-old man named Lazario Macario Gomez. Moreover, in addition to the parents and the soldier, the dinner is attended by the neighbors and friends of the parents, Ursula Mins and her husband Mr. Barakina, whose first name is Michael. In addition to everyone from Beaumont, there is a young farm boy, Bartolome, who serves as a servant for the family. As I told you, Miguel-Juan goes to bed early, around 10 p.m. He leaves his wooden leg and crutch on a chair in the kitchen, and leaning against a wall to stand, hops on his left foot towards his parents' bedroom, which is adjacent to the kitchen. His mother enters the room later and sees 2 feet sticking out from under the coat. Initially, she thinks it's not her son, but a soldier in the wrong bed. After looking at his face, there is literally no doubt, like absolutely none. With the help of her husband, she wakes up her son, which is not an easy task. They will testify that he seemed to be sleeping extremely deeply, a sort of semi-comatose state, we would say today. When Michael wakes up, and realizes that he has both his legs, he is moved. One of his first reactions is to ask his father for forgiveness. Then he is asked if he has any idea how it happened, but he says he doesn't know. He states that when he was awakened, I quote his testimony in the reports, he was dreaming that he was in the holy chapel of Our Lady of the Pillar and that he was anointing his severed leg with the oil from a lamp, as he used to do when he was in that sanctuary. After a few seconds of reflection, he understands. According to him, there is no doubt. He owes this miraculous healing to the Virgin of the Pillar, who appeared in Zaragoza 1600 years earlier, whom he had loved since his childhood, and in whom he had so much faith, he applied oil from the sanctuary to his stump every day for 2 years. We can already see that this story is much more substantiated and documented than one might have thought at first glance. And it does not seem to be simply an embellished legend for medieval obscurantists. Now, as I told you, before jumping to the miracle, we really need to examine all possible hypotheses. Did Michael have a twin brother, for example, who could have been an accomplice in pulling off the biggest hoax in history? Or maybe Michael was never amputated, and all the witnesses were accomplices and made up their entire story. That's what we're going to look at now. And it is only when all natural hypotheses have been eliminated that one can conclude that there has been a supernatural event, and one must still be open to this possibility, because in itself it is not absolutely impossible for a leg to regrow if God exists. For if God exists, he could perform miracles, that is, transgress the physical laws he himself invented. And it would be irrational to claim that it is impossible for God to exist, completely closed to the hypothesis of a miracle. In an investigation, if you want to seek the truth, you must be open to all possibilities, and if evidence becomes clear, you must accept it. So let's return to this famous element of Calanda, and to definitively decide whether it's a miracle or not, let's move forward in time. Let's look at what happened after March 29, 1640, as this will give us other decisive elements that will finally allow us to discover the truth about this matter. After a few moments, Michael starts to move his leg. He feels like he is in a dream. He and his parents still can't believe it. But very surprisingly, in the light of the oil lamp, Michael and his parents discover marks on his leg. And these are actually marks that were on the amputated leg at the time. The most important and most visible one is the scar left by the cartwheel that had fractured his tibia during the accident in Castellón de la Plana. There is also another scar, smaller, caused by a large cyst that Michael had when he was still little, and then 2 deep scratches caused by a thorny plant. Finally, the traces of a dog bite on the calf. A newspaper from the time still preserved today, the Viso Histórico, on the date of June 4, 1640, the day before the trial opened, reports that searches were conducted in the cemetery of the hospital in Zaragoza, but no trace of the leg buried in the cemetery was found. In the section reserved for amputated limbs, there was only a hole in the ground, empty, so we are not dealing with a leg that has regrown, but with a leg that has been reattached. If a miracle occurred, you will admit that it is just as impressive, if not even crazier, because the place where the leg had been buried, at the hospital in Zaragoza, is more than 100 kilometers from Calanda. Meanwhile, in Michael's room, astonishment gives way to jubilation. Do you think they went to bed just like that? No, after such an event, it is difficult to sleep. Bartolome, the young farm boy, went to fetch the neighbors, the Barraquina couple, who had gone home to sleep. First, the husband arrives, then he shouts to call his wife that she rushes over. Soon, many people come running, including Michael's grandmother, and then a white-clad priest. Parishes of which Yusef Herrero is aware. He had the opportunity to see Michael with only one leg at the time when he was begging in Zaragoza. When dawn breaks, almost the entire city is aware. Can you imagine the situation? Everyone is talking about it, of course, because everyone had had the time to see Michael with only one leg during the 3 weeks he had been begging around Calanda, and then the time to observe him at leisure, now with both legs. Thus, a crowd gathers in front of Michael's parents' house. Among the first witnesses on this Friday, March 30th, are several important personalities, starting with the mayor, Michael Escobedo, the 6th Michael, I can't take it anymore, his deputy, Martin Galindo, and another Martin Corellano, the man who holds the positions of justice of the peace and policeman, even if it wasn't called that, you know what I mean. There is also the royal notary, Lazario Macario Gomez, whom we have already mentioned, the notary who had assigned the soldiers' sleeping arrangements. All will testify later. In the crowd are also 2 doctors, Juan de Rivera and Giuseppe Nebot, who will both have to face the evidence. The very next day, Friday, one of the companies of soldiers that had slept in Calanda was heading to Mazaleon for their next stage. There, they will inform the whole village about the miracle that had taken place the day before, 50 kilometers from here. The priest, Marco Seguer, is very surprised to learn about this. Skeptical, he then wants to go there to learn more, full of caution. He plans to be accompanied by a serious man, who is not the type to believe in fables, and who will help him uncover any trickery if there is any. He chooses to go there with the notary I mentioned at the beginning, the famous master Michael Andreu, and so they arrive in Calanda on Sunday, April 1st, also accompanied by another priest, Don Pedro Vicente. The notary would be able to question numerous witnesses to write a serious document that would attest to the events that had truly taken place. A notary is a bit like an official referee for very important documents. Their job is to ensure that when people sign documents like house purchase contracts, wills, or marriage contracts, everything is done correctly according to the law. The notary verifies the identity of the people signing the document to ensure that they are indeed who they claim to be. When a notary drafts what is called a notarial act, they put their reputation on the line. A notary is a serious person who must not do just anything, otherwise basically he gets fired. Besides, we know that Mr. Michael Andreu was a serious and reputable notary, as even today, many documents bearing his signature have reached us, and we can broadly reconstruct his long years as a notary in Mazzaleone. For example, we have his entire register for the year 1640. It is a volume bound in parchment measuring 22 x 16 centimeters with a total of 120 pages. Inside, we find in chronological order the 72 acts he established in 1640, contract of sale, lease, will, etc. Act number 22 of his register is the act he established on Monday, April 2nd, 1640, for the case of Miguel-Juan Pellicer, spanning a total of 151 lines. Mr. Andreu, to write his act, chose most of his witnesses from those who do not live in Calanda itself. After questioning them, he simply wrote down the facts in a sober but detailed manner. Like Mr. Andreu was a royal notary, the deed is done in the name of the king. For those interested anyway, you will find plenty of additional information on this case in the book The Unthinkable Miracle by Vittorio Messori. This is the main book I used to make this video. It has plenty of additional information in it, so I recommend it to you. I'll put a link in the description. So, I'll spare you the details, but the notarial deed of April 2nd is very clear. The conclusions of the notary, who had to face the facts after questioning quite a few witnesses, all independent of each other, are that there was indeed a miracle. By the way, the title of his act, therefore, is Acto Público Milagro que se hizo en Calanda. Yes, I still don't have the accent, but it's not a big deal. Basically, it means public act on a miracle that took place in Calanda. Well, in a few moments, I am going to tell you about something even more interesting than this notarial act. But still, to start with, it's already pretty good. Because what we know is that even the notary who went there to verify the facts for himself had to acknowledge the obviousness of the Shadow Age and appeared. Besides, it's funny, because Voltaire, a critical Frenchman to the church who lived in the following century, wrote a philosophical dictionary, and in the article Miracle, you can sense a very skeptical tone. Voltaire explains that to recognize a miracle, it would require a serious act, like a notary's deed. And he grumbles in a, "Oh, what a coincidence, it never happens" manner. Well, precisely, that's what happened in Calanda nearly 120 years before Voltaire wrote that. But obviously Voltaire knew nothing about our brave Michael. The month of April passes, and little by little, the entire region, the former kingdom of Aragon, whose capital is Zaragoza, becomes aware of what happened to Michael. The Pellicer family, at the end of April, then begins a pilgrimage to Zaragoza. You remember, that's where Michael had his amputation. And almost all of the 25,000 inhabitants of this small town had seen her at least once during her 2 years on Amandier Street, after her amputation and before her return to Canada. It's normal, since almost the entire population of the city was Catholic, and therefore regularly went to the church where Michael begged for alms, so you can imagine that upon his arrival in the city, Michael was a source of wonder for the entire town. Well, the most astonished, as you can imagine, is of course Professor D'Estaing, since he himself amputated Michael and then organized his follow-up for several months. And this is where something interesting is going to happen. The whole city was talking about nothing else, so the municipality, that is, the civil authorities of Zaragoza, requested that a trial be opened to definitively determine if Michael was not an imposter who liked to create a buzz, thus causing a disturbance to public order. On May 8th, 28 city councillors asked the church to open an investigation. It should be noted that the church is extremely cautious and reserved about any strange phenomenon, which could be a fraud. At the time, it was the role of the infamous Inquisition tasked with investigating, sometimes with almost exaggerated rigor, all somewhat suspicious cases. Anyone who knows even a little about the history of Spain at that time knows with what energy the Inquisition pursued the Illuminati, self-proclaimed prophets, announcers of new miracles, etc. Moreover, for those who want to know more about the Inquisition, I recommend the latest video I released on scandals in the history of the Church. Assisted by 9 theologians, it is therefore the Archbishop himself, Msnr. Pedro Apaulazar Ramirez, known for his rigor, who is the judge and president of the tribunal. But he knows the final responsibility will fall on him if he makes a wrong diagnosis, and he will have to answer for it before the Inquisition, and probably before the Pope. But the civil authorities want to be represented during this trial and therefore appoint 3 people who will be part of the jury. 2 academics, in other words, 2 intellectuals, and a highly important person close to the king were chosen. These 3 individuals know they are somebody and that their reputation is at stake. They certainly won't recognize such a big miracle if it isn't indeed extremely well established. They're not crazy, right? The eminent Dr. Felipe de Bardaxi, holder of the chair of canon law at the city's university, Gil Michael Foster, professor of law at the same university, the 7th Michael in our story, well, everything is fine, and a magistrate attorney general of His Majesty Philip IV for the Kingdom of Aragon, Michael Cypris. Were there more Michaels in 17th century Spain than subscribers here? The trial opens on June 5th and lasts 11 months until April 27th, 1641. To ensure transparency, it takes place in public and everyone can attend. The court asks numerous questions to the different witnesses, but what interests us is question 29. Which concerns the identity of Michael. The court proceeds as follows. It brings Michael before each witness and asks each witness if they recognize that Michael, who is standing today on both feet, is indeed the same person they previously saw with only one leg and without a stump. Because during the trial, as you might suspect, the fact that Michael has both legs is absolutely beyond doubt. Some doctors even take great pleasure in pricking Michael's leg to see how it reacts. And of course, it reacts like a normal leg. So the only question that interests us is, has this person who is standing today on both legs indeed had one leg amputated before, and indeed spent more than 2 years with only one leg? If yes, then it's good. We must be honest, the miracle will be necessary. But then, who are the witnesses? To choose them, the court had options. There were almost too many people, as thousands of individuals, whether in Zaragoza, around Calanda, or elsewhere, claimed to have seen Michael with only one leg. Among the large selection of possible witnesses, the trial retained 24 people who played a key role during the 2 years of Michael's Nijambiste. The majority of the witnesses are independent of each other, come from different towns, met Michael at different times, and did not necessarily know each other before the events. There are a bit of all the different protagonists I have mentioned to you so far. We will have 5 doctors, including the surgeon who amputated Michael and the apprentice doctor who buried the leg, for example. 5 family members and neighbors, 4 local authorities, 4 priests, and finally 6 various witnesses. The innkeeper in Zaragoza, where Michael used to regularly sleep when he had begged enough. Or the innkeeper in Semper, do you remember? Thus, to the question about the identity of Michael, who now stands before them on both feet, 22 out of 24 witnesses swear they have no hesitation in affirming that he is indeed the same man they previously saw with only one leg and a stump. Only 2 respond "mi parece," which means "it seems to me." They are the hospital priest and a colleague of Dr. Destanga. This response, "it is indeed the same man," reflects a scruple of conscience about the fact that they had known the young man only a short time before his amputation, and not a single one of the 22 other witnesses expresses any doubt about the identity or truthfulness. Ultimately, none of the 24 witnesses expresses a negative opinion. Could it be a real conspiracy that all the witnesses agreed to lie during the trial? No, obviously not, because the witnesses did not all know each other and had no interest in lying or making things up. For example, why would the renowned Professor Juan de Estanga, head of department, who taught at the University of Zaragoza and who himself amputated Michael, have lied? And he stated that he had absolutely no doubt about Michael's identity. Thus, the hypothesis of an error by all these witnesses at the same time seems quite grotesque as well. Moreover, I remind you, because it is extremely important, that thousands of other people had seen Michael with only one leg in Zaragoza during those 2 years of begging and would have been ready to testify if needed. Moreover, when the miracle is recognized, there will be a great celebration in May 1641 on the forecourt of the church in Zaragoza where Michael used to beg, and thousands of people who knew Michael from the time of his amputated leg will attend to give thanks to God for such a great miracle. Second hypothesis, maybe Michael had a twin brother, a brother with a healthy leg who played the role of the miraculously healed after Michael's amputation. It's an enticing hypothesis. Unfortunately, it doesn't hold up. Indeed, the parish records confirm that Michael was born alone in March 1617. Besides, this hypothesis is so far-fetched that no one, neither before, during, nor after the trial, dared to defend it. That would have obviously been ridiculous, since Calanda was a small town where all the inhabitants knew each other very well, and where many families married into each other. If Michael had had a twin brother, it would have been known. There aren't many other hypotheses to propose. For example, some think that Michael's leg might have been a prosthesis. But I think it's really taking all the doctors who examined Michael with both legs for complete idiots, so let's not dwell on that. Anyone can tell the difference between a prosthetic and a real leg, real flesh, since when his foot was pricked, he reacted perfectly. We do have proof that Mr. Miguel-Juan Pellicer had both his legs after March 29, 1640, and yet, we also have proof that he had a leg amputated at the end of October 1637. and that he remained one-legged for 2.5 years. If we want to accept the facts and not be in denial of reality, since we have exhausted all possible natural hypotheses, it is quite reasonable to say that indeed, there was a miracle. Several great thinkers like Jean-Martin Charcot, Émile Zola, and Ernest Renan used to say, "I would only believe in a miracle if someone showed me a severed leg growing back, but that has not happened and never will." This phrase is now coming back to haunt them like a boomerang. It must be said that they didn't know about the miracle of Calanda, or it was from afar, like those who know about it today and yet do not believe in it. Most of the criticisms made about this miracle today are made by people who have not really delved into the subject. They often think, well, it's too old and it's based on testimonies, so it's worthless. We've seen that this reasoning is not valid. So now that you, thanks to this video, know about this case, does it mean that you are obliged to believe that it is a miracle, a supernatural event, and therefore obliged to believe in God? No, you remain perfectly free. The philosopher Blaise Pascal said that there is enough light for those who want to believe, and enough darkness for those who do not want to believe. Which means that if one really does not want to believe in God, one can always deny the obvious by inventing far-fetched hypotheses. It can be done. It's not very smart, but it can be done. For example, the chemist Luigi Garlascelli, having learned about the miracle of Calenda and not wanting to believe in God, tried to find explanations. Basically, according to him, Michael was never amputated. He hid his injured leg under his coat during those 2 years of begging, and then he revealed his 2 legs 2.5 years later. But this implies that the doctors who amputated him, all the other witnesses, including the 24 witnesses during the trial, and finally the thousands of people in Zaragoza, believed in such a big miracle without being certain. It's taking our ancestors for fools. But well, once again, everyone is free to believe what they want. God does not really want to force anyone to believe in him, and so we always have the possibility of being insincere. A bit like Chesterton, the English writer and author of detective novels, said, "A believer is a person who accepts a miracle if the evidence compels them to. A non-believer is a person who does not even accept to discuss miracles, since his doctrine forbids him from doing so." But you might be asking yourself another question. Why aren't there more miracles like that nowadays? But in fact, dear friends, there are. In the first investigation on my channel about the existence of God, you will discover the case of an American whose intestine regrew in 2006 after a prayer in Jesus' name. All the evidence is in my video. You will see. If you want to explore deeper into all this, you can subscribe to Ep.1, a newsletter that sends a very detailed report once a month on various topics related to the Catholic faith. These are investigative reports with all the sources. Linking a link in the description, I mentioned to investigate 100 cases of inexplicable mysteries, well documented without any miracles. The miracle of Calanda was just the first, and there are still 99 more. 99 impressive miracles, verified, documented, and some of them very recent. So subscribe because some very, very, very big things are coming in the next weeks and months. Alright, just before you leave, friends, a quick announcement. Stay with me. I have created an organized method, a complete guide, the ultimate guide to spiritual life, life with God, because miracles are great, they strengthen our faith, etc. But what matters now is to establish a relationship with Jesus, to build a loving relationship with him, because if God exists and can perform miracles, he can especially perform the miracle in our lives of creating this loving relationship with him. So really, we must not miss this, because the purpose of our life is to live for him. And so I have truly decided to create a genuine method to learn how to move towards God, to journey towards him. So these are really the most important videos I could have ever made. I've been working on them for months and months and months. And on top of that, I decided to make them completely free, absolutely free. While it is indeed truly invaluable, Jesus told us, "You have received freely, give freely." So it's true that it was the only way to fund my videos, to fund my channel. It was paid for several months. And then, I really felt this calling. I felt this calling to make it entirely free. So I trust in your generosity. You can support me a bit more if you want to help with all these projects on the channel, this series on miracles. And then, for all the upcoming projects, I'll talk to you about them on the other side. You will be able to click on the button if you are interested. So, in the description or in the pinned comment, really, don't miss out. These are truly the craziest videos I've ever made. They can genuinely change your life. So go watch them.